Welcome to my views and news. Breaking news from the Amhara region of Ethiopia, where several farmers have been injured. Security forces opened fire at the farmers. What happened there? In which town of the Amhara region this incident happened? We have seen protests by farmers in the Amhara region due to lack of fertilizers, high price of fertilizers. Farmers are facing different problems. This is farming season, but sufficient fertilizer is not available, especially in the Amhara region. Secondly, viewers, Tigray youth, former TDF members were arrested by Tigray interim government a few days ago. Whereabouts of these former TDF members are still unknown. Why were they arrested? 2 days ago, around 48 hours ago, there was a protest in Mekelle by disabled Tigray fighters and former TDF members. There they raised this issue. We have details. Firstly, Amhara region of Ethiopia, viewers, where lack of fertilizers, lack of fertilizer for farmers is a serious issue. We have seen several protests. Farmers were seen marching in Bahirdar, regional capital. They tried to contact regional agricultural wing office, but agricultural wing authorities were not accessible. They protested outside Amhara regional government building too, and Amhara government, I think, in a statement acknowledged lack of fertilizers. Lack of fertilizers, fertilizer supply could not be ensured to all farmers in the Amhara region. Interestingly, we did not see any protests in other parts of Ethiopia. No protests in Oromia, in BG, in Gambela, etc. Only protests were seen in the Amhara region. Farmers were complaining that brokers, traders were being given fertilizers, prices were high, and ordinary farmers were being ignored by the government. Today, security forces, in an unfortunate incident, opened fire at Amhara farmers. The incident happened near Shanti. Shanti is a small town close to Bahirdar. It's not far away from Bahirdar, regional capital. And there, farmers were waiting to receive their fertilizer bags from government officials. But then some brokers or merchants arrived with some pickups and they started loading fertilizer bags reportedly. Reportedly, there were brokers and merchants. That led to start of argument between the Amhara farmers and Amhara regional government officials of agriculture department there. This argument turned into riot and security forces were already there. They opened fire. Some Amhara farmers were injured. Bullets were fired, so they were injured by bullets. Security forces in Ethiopia are so irresponsible that they just know one way of controlling protests, and that is state firing. I mean, when you want to disperse protests, when you want to handle a public gathering, there is an SOP how to control crowd. You never fire protesters. You talk to them, you try to involve notables among them, you use other means, firing of tear gas, etc. But in Ethiopia, we have seen that security forces, since they are not held accountable, and since government maybe wants to terrorize those who want to protest, that is why they are not reluctant to fire at protesters. We saw that in Addis Ababa. 8 people killed there, 8 Muslims on 2 consecutive Fridays. No one was held accountable. And in Amhara region, we have seen that too in the past too. And again, farmers are suffering. They know their livelihoods depend upon this farming season. If they don't have fertilizers, if they don't have seeds, how will they farm their lands? How will they have something to eat, something for their families to survive on? So it's a matter of life and death for them. They would be frustrated, they would be tense. It's government's responsibility to talk to them, to tolerate, even if to tolerate if farmers have some grievances. Grievances could be sometimes undue, but it's government's responsibility to handle the situation. Government is not reluctant to use force. Several farmers injured near Shanti, Amhara region today. Secondly, viewers, Tigray, where dissent is not allowed, criticism is not allowed. Tigray is no different from Addis Ababa. Tigray region, Tigray interim government is like Ethiopian federal government. So Tigray youth who were fighting for their rights are now suffering at the hands of Tigray interim government. We have seen 3 protests in Mekelle so far by disabled Tigray fighters. And after these protests, we saw meetings between the protesters and Tigray government officials and TDF generals. I think Migbe attended one meeting. Before that, Sadkan attended a meeting too. Getachew also talked to these protesters. And when they protested the first time, we saw that the security forces used tear gas, and some disabled Tigray fighters, they were injured, some people say. Their first protest was about lack of medical care, that the center where they are is being neglected by the government, that they are not receiving sufficient food and medical care. In the second protest, after the second protest, they held a meeting with Tigray interim government officials and reportedly military officers too. And there, some of them raised questions. They criticized Tigray leadership, including Debretsion Mekelle, former Tigray president. They said that at one point in the 2-year-long war, Debretsion had been encircled. So Tigray fighters saved Debretsion, and hundreds lost their lives in that operation to save Debretsion. They spoke about financial corruption too, accusing Tigray leadership. And some of those who criticized Tigray leadership at the second protest, at the second meeting after the protest, they went missing. They're still missing. Their whereabouts are unknown. That is why 2 days ago we saw a third protest. And in the third protest, fighters, they demanded the release of their comrades who were abducted by Tigray government officials, security forces, after they criticized Tigray leaders at the second protest. They're still missing. That is why we saw a protest. Today as well, there was a protest in Mekelle, but that protest was pensioners protesting that they're not being paid pensions. Protest is obviously against the regional government and federal government. But the disappearance of former TDF members is an indication that Tigray is no different from Addis Ababa. Just like PM Abiy's government is not ready to tolerate any criticism, same is happening in Tigray. This political culture which we are seeing in Mekelle and Tigray should have been changed. That is why youth of Tigray fought. That is why they fought, they lost their lives, they sacrificed. Some of them have lost their limbs. But they were hoping that they would be living in a better Tigray region. more democratic, more inclusive, more participatory. But Tigray government is behaving in the same manner as we're seeing the federal government behave, where Muslims shot dead in Addis Ababa. Orthodox followers complain as well. Farmers being shot by security forces in Amhara. Just a few minutes ago, I reported that. So Tigray should have presented itself as a role model for Ethiopia. It was being said, by the way, in the 2-year-long war that Tigray would be a role model for the rest of Ethiopia, for entire East Africa, Horn of Africa. But you see the role model. Dissent is not allowed, it is discouraged, it is crushed rather. Thank you for watching.